non-fat yogurt episode. One of my personal favorites, and definitely one of the more underrated, another one of an underrated episode of Seinfeld that I feel does not quite get the attention it deserves, but it's a really good episode. Excuse me. This is probably the only episode in the series, though, besides episodes where they had to, reshoot scenes because, someone else is playing Frank Costanza or, something like that. But other than that, this is the only episode in the series that has two different versions to it because of the storyline of including the mayor of New York. So, this episode was filmed. The story behind it was this idea of a non-fat yogurt store that was being advertised as non-fat yogurt. The yogurt, though, ends up having fat in it, so it's false advertised. Which actually, at the time, like the interviews with them, the Inside Look had just happened fairly recently, of course. But I don't know, they just thought that it would be funny to have the mayor make a speech in the episode and kind of be involved with the whole thing. Make it feel a little more real. The problem was, though, at the time, it was right in the middle of the election for the mayor of New York. Between the current mayor, David Dinkins, the Democrat, and his running mate, Republican, Rudy Giuliani. Now, they could have, to me, maybe just waited another week or so until they knew the results, just so it's not like, crammed or whatnot, so that way they make it more accurately. I guess, I don't know why they didn't just do that, but the show was to air 2 days after the results of the election were going to be announced. So, in the midst of filming for that episode, they didn't know who the mayor of New York was going to be when they filmed it that Thursday night at 9 o'clock, when the episode was going to air. So, they apparently did not have good luck, which obviously was obvious if you watch DVDs and see the alternative version. They weren't really, getting a good feel from the Dinkins side. So Dinkins, they weren't going to be able to get David Dinkins to do a speech. So Rudy Giuliani, who apparently is a huge Seinfeld fan, was all for it. But of course they couldn't film anything until they couldn't film Giuliani. The alternative they had for Dinkins, they filmed someone pretending to be Dinkins' aide. The scene they filmed, which we'll explain that when we get to that scene. They had like a spokesperson in for David Dinkins, and they called it Dinkins' aide. They were going to use, which was played by the character was supposed to be Philip Trout. The character was played by Phil Morris, who would eventually go on to be the guest star for Jackie Childs, who was definitely a great supporting character. But apparently, spoiler alert, if Dinkins would have won and they used the Phil Morris scene, the Philip Trout scene, the chances, they probably would not have had him come back to play Jackie Childs, which would have been a shame because Jackie Childs was an excellent character. But because they had to wait and see the election, and Giuliani won, they on Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, since Giuliani had won, when he was getting ready to do his first address as mayor or whatnot, they filmed a scene that Wednesday morning, and they got it edited and just done in time to air on Thursday night at 9 o'clock. So it was definitely like a nail biter down to the rim. But because Giuliani was willing to actually do it if he won the election, they definitely were, the cast and crew were definitely all in on Giuliani, apparently, from what I hear. But since obviously you know the correct story, let's get into the regular version is with Giuliani winning the election. So Kramer had invested in a non-fat yogurt store. He was part owner of it. And everybody seemed to be eating there quite a lot because it was advertised as non-fat and it was very delicious. Either people were just like, how could this not have any fat in it and whatnot. Jerry also apparently had done a little bit of profanity at a couple of his shows. And he even in the yogurt store said, "This is so effing good." And the real owner of the store, his son Matthew and his wife Marilyn walked past, and Matthew was just a young boy. Matthew is actually the same boy that was on the street in the parking space episode that Jerry said, "How's your father? I heard he's going to be going out, closing up or something like that," and he like freaked out. And of course, his mom said, "Jerry, why do you say stuff like that or whatnot?" The same kid that they brought back. So obviously it comes back to bite him in the butt later, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. As they're getting up to leave, Elaine goes to get like a little cup to go, I think. George, though, then spots an old childhood nemesis of his, Lloyd Braun, which my dad always teases me about Lloyd Braun because as a baseball fan, I can say despised now, he just retired this year, but I despised Ryan Braun. I just never liked him. So my dad always jags me about Lloyd Braun saying this is a relative of a great star and whatnot. But apparently the name Lloyd Braun came from Larry David's executive entertainment lawyer. And I guess he played him in a game of golf, and he said, if I win, I get to use your name, and that's where the name Lloyd Braun came from. This, of course, was the first of 2 or 3 episodes, I think it was, that the Lloyd Braun character was in, but he was played by different actors. Of course, Lloyd sees George, recognizes him, so George tries to be, polite. Now, he says that Braun was the special advisor for Mayor Dinkins. In whichever version would have came out, Braun was going to be the big advisor for whichever candidate lost the election. So obviously, since Giuliani won, he was the big advisor for Dinkins. And he's trying to make casual chit chat, but it wasn't like, George was like not giving him much of a long answers at all. But but George kind of did like the elbow Jerry for no reason. I don't know if it's a sign of like, let's get out of here, like let's do something, and then he goes, something wrong with your arm. But George did not want Lloyd to think he was crazy, he was like more intelligent than him or whatnot. He made up some excuse where how he banged his arm on a desk and it has this like involuntary movement, like it's like some sort of like a spasm or whatnot. It does. And also, but then also, him and Elaine make eye contact, and Elaine thinks he's pretty cute, which George is like, no, he's a jerk. So they, but of course, later on, he would ask for Elaine's number, and that would go through with it and whatnot. But then back at Jerry's apartment, Jerry and Elaine were just chilling and talking. Kramer came in, though, and points out that it looked like that they were both putting on some weight. They weighed themselves. They both gained around 8 pounds. And then they were like, what's going on? Like, we're doing everything's normal. But then Jerry starts to say, maybe it's the yogurt. And then Kramer goes, it can't be. It's 100% non-fat. And then, maybe not. So Elaine comes with the idea of calling, one of the labs to see if they can get the yogurt tested to see if it's fat-free or not. Meanwhile, Jerry gets knocked on the door, and it's Matthew's mother, who basically says how Matthew's saying the F-bomb like every word, like F, like F. Where's my effing cupcake, and all this and that. And of course, Matthew's a big fan of Jerry. She looks up to him. He wants to be a comedian like him. So she's like, we talked to him, and Jerry said he'd be glad to. And then he says, by the way, since of course she is the wife of the number one owner of the yogurt store, even though Kramer again is part owner, he says, we've been eating a lot of your husband's yogurt. Is there any fat in it? And she just goes, no effing way, and walks away. Then of course, Elaine's found a place in Brooklyn that can test the yogurt for $45. Which, like, okay, we can do that. Of course, Kramer was still making, like, the fat jokes to Jerry and Elaine, which was starting to get on their nerves. And then Kramer says, if there's any fat in that yogurt, I'll go on an all-yogurt diet for a week. And he's like, you're on. So they head out, and Kramer goes with them. They stop by the yogurt place, where Newman was sitting there with all of his post office buddies eating a yogurt, just like bragging about it, and like just acting like like a big kid, or like a big immature kid, with his buddies and whatnot. Of course, the owner of the yogurt place, who's again Matthew's father, says something to Jerry about him, swearing in front of him, and he goes, "I'm going to talk to him later, get it all straightened out." Elaine just asks for a cup of vanilla and a cup to go, and she goes, and it's non-fat, right? It's like, "That's right." She says, "I'm on a special diet, and I can't have any fat at all." And he's like, "We have nothing to worry about." So they get the yogurt, and they're heading off, and then they start worrying because the yogurt was melted. And Kramer is bragging about and calling Jerry Chubbs or Fatso and whatnot, and bragging about how he got a 90% in biology growing up, and that how since the yogurt's melted, it changes the molecules, meaning that it's not going to give an accurate result when they test it. They get to the lab place and they walk in there, sign the papers, and of course they ask, does it matter if it's melted? And the guy's like, no. And then they're just looking around, and then Jerry happens to notice a test tube, and they were testing Giuliani's blood, which, of course, again, if in the alternative version, they would have tested Dinkins' blood, but testing Dinkins' blood if he would have won the election, which, of course, kind of puts basically the whole election gone up into jeopardy because of so many different factors. But meanwhile, though, Kramer seems to become smitten with one of the chemists who was in there, and basically asked her on a date. Which, of course, as they're driving back, they were telling him how he can't take the chemist out, and she's part of the jury basically. So they thought that Kramer, which he could have been, was trying to bribe that chemist to say that the yogurt was non-fat. Which, I mean, she probably did remain pretty biased if the results came in what happened with. Meanwhile, George was back with his parents, and Lloyd came to visit. And of course, Lloyd mentions how he got George a doctor's appointment with Dinkins' doctor, and then of course George's like, "Nah, I'll be good," and then I don't need to go. The doctor said there's nothing really they can do, but then his dad tells him, "No, you're gonna do that because Dinkins went out of his way for you, blah blah blah," and then. Before he left, that's where he asked George for Elaine's number, but George said he doesn't have it because he does not like Lloyd. But then Mrs. Costanza tells him that her name's Elaine Bennis, and then to call her at Pendant Publishing. That's where she works at. So he calls and they sets up a date with her, which Elaine's excited about, and of course George is telling Elaine just to lie about his involuntary movement. An arm, but she first refused to do it, but she ended up going through it in the end. We'll get that in a second. Kramer, of course, then goes out on a date with the chemist. They go back to the lab, and they just light a Bunsen burner and the chill in there. Kramer feeds her some cappuccino flavored yogurt, and of course she thought it was delicious, but he's like, "You tell me, is it non-fat or not?" And she's just like, "The verdict's not in yet." So then they start making out, and then Kramer pushes a chair. The chair bumps into the table that has the blood sample for Giuliani, and I'm not sure if this is accurate or not, but a tube of something else falls into Giuliani's blood, which some say that it was part of the yogurt sample. So I'm not 100% sure if that is correct or not, but something, other specimen, fell inside of Giuliani's blood. Which of course would put the results in jeopardy for the election. In the next scene, Elaine and Lloyd are on their date. They're sitting in the non-fat yogurt store, and of course they're talking about George's involuntary arm movement of his arm. But then Elaine changes the subject and asks him about his job being a big advisor for Dinkins. And she says, if I was running for mayor, my campaign would be that if I win, that everyone should wear name tags in the city just to make the city friendlier. In which Lloyd was thinking, maybe I'll mention that to the mayor. He offers her some yogurt, which she didn't refuse, saying she's on a diet, even though he said, well, it's non-fat. He goes, yeah, so they say. So as they're getting ready to leave, Lloyd puts his arm around her, but gets her this weird, looks down at her butt and gives her this weird look. And 3 days go by and Lloyd hadn't called her, and she thinks it's because Lloyd thinks she's fat. Because she saw how Lloyd looked at her butt, and then went back to his apartment, and she sat on a chair, and it broke. And I forgot the line that Lloyd said, basically. But there's that. Then Kramer, of course, comes in though, and he said, "Asks anything on the yogurt?" Nope. He's like, "Well, I want to get your hopes up." He's like, "Why is that?" "No reason." And he says, "Oh, did you hear about that Dinkins?" He mentions there's this laughingstock campaign he has going out there about how if he wins, everybody should wear name tags in the city. Which Elaine's smiling, thinking like, "Oh my gosh, I'm gonna pick my idea," but then frowns on when she realizes that everybody thinks it's a laughingstock of a joke. And then of course George was with his parents laughing about it, and all this and that with them. But rewind back earlier though, George went to see Dinkins' doctor. And this is another one of my favorite George scenes. Like, we already talked about this one. One of my if I can mention some of my favorite George scenes, like definitely one we've gotten to was this, like the George character to a T, was the scene back in the Red Dot where he got fired for fooling around with the cleaning lady in his office, and he was just like, "Was that wrong? Should I not have done that?" Like that one. And then this one right here also was another one of my favorite scenes. So, like, George obviously is like explaining to the doctor how, like, it's like if I concentrate really well, that and it doesn't do it, but then my focus and never mind. But then the doctor says they did the X-rays and everything, and he finds nothing wrong with him. He's like, "That's strange," and he goes, "No, not really. I think just maybe that you're faking." And then George is like, "Me? Like, what kind of a person would do something like that?" And the guy is like, "I don't know, maybe a very sick person." George is like, "Okay, a person who has no problem wasting other people's time. All right." And he said a couple other things. George is like, "Okay, I get it." It's just like, he's like, non-verbally with his body language, acknowledging, like, not bad of a way to, sum up how I am, which I thought was priceless. And then he tells George to get out, but as George reached down to grab something off the floor, he actually did bang his arm off the desk, and then he for real had the spasm, because you saw it in the scene where he was making fun of Braun for the whole name tags thing. But then Jerry does get the call, and wait, hold on, back up, I forgot another pivotal scene. I forgot about this one. So there is a scene where Matthew and his mother come to Jerry's apartment, and his mom's like, "You remember Jerry?" And with the biggest smile on his face, like this 10 or 11-year-old boy, the biggest smile on his face, goes, "I know, he's a funny peep." With the biggest smile on his face. Jerry has a serious talk with them and tell him how, like, cursing isn't wrong and how he should not have done it. He's not going to do it again. I think the phone then rang, but as he's on the phone, Jerry turns around and Matthew's like playing with his tapes, and then he just flips out and swears at him again, which of course, is bad image. But anyways, fast forward back to where we were. Jerry gets a call and he's told that there is fat in the yogurt. So they're just like, "What should we do? Maybe we shouldn't say anything," until the news came on. And again, this is where it was either going to be the scene with Giuliani or the scene with Philip Trout. They were saying how Giuliani's cholesterol levels came back in his blood sample, like, very high. So which obviously kind of put a little bit of put his position kind of in jeopardy. But then they announced also that Mayor Dinkins had fired Lloyd Braun, who was responsible for the whole name tag campaign thing. So Elaine's suggestion that he thought was a good idea cost him his job. And then, of course, they have Giuliani, addressing his, high cholesterol or whatnot. And he mentions all this stuff. He says, I eat well, I exercise regularly. The only thing is I eat a lot of frozen yogurt, but it's non-fat. And that's what set Jerry off and decided he needs to call and mayor's headquarters or whatnot to tell them about this. And then, because he's gotten the mayor, it's going too far. So, well, he's gotten Giuliani, and it's gone too far. So, that's where basically they have Giuliani do a speech, basically where he promises, be elected mayor, he will put a stop to this non-fat yogurt scandal or whatnot. Which then in the last scene they show them how they're back at the yogurt place and like there's barely anybody there, and they don't like the new yogurt obviously because it has to be legitimately non-fat and it's terrible. And of course Newman was sitting in the background. He's like, "Thanks a lot. I hope you're happy, Jerry." And then they read something in the paper how there was another tube that was spilled into Giuliani's, which caused his cholesterol to be 150 points higher than it ended up being, and when they redid the test, they basically said how of course it put him in jeopardy, but the whole thing, the whole non-fat yogurt fiasco basically turned it around and swept Giuliani into office, which apparently Giuliani winning was an upset, from what I've heard. And of course, Elaine's like, "I wonder what actually happened though in that lab." And Kramer's like, "Yeah, me too." But it's like, Kramer, you were the one who did it. You were the one who was getting frisky with the lab technician, and you knocked blood into some other specimen, which a lot of people say was part of the yogurt specimen. Now there's a deleted scene where Braun is there and he chews out Elaine for the whole name tag thing, and then George, who has for real has the involuntary movement, he's like, "Yeah, you can quit that too." He's like, "It's for real this time," but he just walks out, and as Newman walks out too. But then the episode ends with Matthew and Marilyn walking by, and she basically gave Matthew permission to say this: "Thanks for ruining my daddy's business, you fat beep." So it's kind of truly ties to now, Jerry, slipping up and saying some profanity in front of a young kid, but also because Kramer's calling him fatso and whatnot for gaining the weight he did from the yogurt. But that's the episode. Again, talked a lot about it, but it's a good episode. Again, one of my favorites. Underrated, and again, definitely the craziness of trying to get the final edit put together, which makes me wonder why didn't they just wait. Well, then again, the story of it having an actual impact on the actual election, having more in real time, probably made it better, of course. So yeah, both versions, of course, again, are available on the DVD. But again, the real version is with Giuliani winning and Lloyd Braun being David Dinkins' a special advisor, and the alternative, of course, the opposite. Dinkins wins the election, but of course he wasn't on the episode. They said they had Phil Morris pose as his aide, Philip Trout, but had that happen, Phil Morris may not have been considered for the role of Jackie Childs. And also, again, like I said before, it's not the last time we will see Lloyd Braun. So stay tuned for more of him as well. So guys, that's the non-fat yogurt. What were your thoughts on the non-fat yogurt episode? Make sure to leave your thoughts down in the comment section below. Be sure as always to slap a like on the video and subscribe for more content on my channel. Follow me on Twitter as well at DemandAirboy93. Till then guys, I'm checking out. I'll catch y'all later. I'll see you guys in the next episode, which has a very interesting musical score in the next episode. We'll talk about that next. Till then guys, I'm checking out. I'll catch y'all later. Have a great rest of your night. And peace out, everybody.